Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Dorrington, and I'm going to be your host this afternoon for this webinar in conjunction with Basware. Now, joining me today, I have two really expert speakers. I'm looking forward to hearing them. So I've got Georg from Basware. Hi, Georg.
Hi, Peter.
And Lisa from Cone. So hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to you both. Now, before I hand over to Georg to do the first part of our scene setting today, as well as introducing himself, and he'll be followed by Lisa, I just wanted to go through a little bit of housekeeping. Now, as you can see, because this is a webinar, you don't have to worry about being on camera or being on mute, but we do want you to ask questions. And how can you do that, you might ask? Well, if you look for the menu bar, which is tucked away underneath those three buttons that on maybe on one side on your machine, you'll see that there's a chat channel. And if you join chat at any time during our webinar, you can ask a question or make an observation. If it's a question, I'll acknowledge it. It may move over to the Q&A tab. But in any case, at the end or towards the end of our webinar, we'll try and address as many of your questions as we possibly can. So ask a question at any time during the webinar, but we'll probably answer it towards the end. So do that in chat. Now, this webinar is being recorded. So when we get towards the end, I'll explain how you can access that. We'll send you the links to download it. So don't worry too much about taking lots of notes. You can always watch a playback at your convenience. And as I say, don't forget, please do feel free to ask questions. Now, once we've gone through the scene setting, we'll have a fireside discussion between Georg, Lisa, and myself before we go to the open Q&A. And that'll be your last chance to answer questions before we do the quickest of summaries and wrap-ups, and I promise I will get everybody away as scheduled. Now, in a moment, as I say, I'm going to hand over to Georg to start his first segment on setting the scene and presentation. And whilst he does that, Lisa and I will be off camera, but I will still be here checking those chat communications and answering any messages that you send to me whilst you do so. So without further ado, Georg, I'd like to hand over to you, if you wouldn't mind, a bit of a screen share. Lisa, you and I are going to pop off camera for a moment and go on to mute.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction, and I might introduce myself. My name is Georg Sonner. I'm a global business advisor at Basware, a Finnish-based purchase-to-pay technology provider. And before we start today, I wanted to ask you, have you heard about the European tax gap? I know we're talking about the trends in global e-invoice compliance, but understanding the reasons for it, why we need to take care about that, is important. So let's talk about the European tax gap first. If we look at different compliance models, as said, that's important to understand. The tax gap is the difference between what a country should get from companies as a tax revenue and what a country actually gets. Of course, that's an estimation, as the first number, what a country should actually get, is based on guessing, research, and some statistics. But recently, in a paper that was issued by the European Commission and was published in September last year, they quantified that. The tax gap was estimated at 120 billion euro in the European Union. That is a massive number, 120 billion euro. Let's just put that into perspective. If you compare the European tax gap to the GDP of Finland, of course, I've chosen Finland because Basware and Kone are both Finnish companies. The GDP in 2020 was roughly 236 billion euros. And more than half of Finland's GDP on a year is lost in the European Union as tax income. It's close to the total amount of the annual budget of the European Union, which is roughly 170 billion euros a year. And it's 12 times as much of the annual revenue of Kone, our co-host for today. So this is a very large number. But what does it mean for you, and why am I starting with that? It means that countries in Europe will start changing the way they do control commerce. The European Union and a lot of countries all over the world invested a significant amount of money to cover losses in the economy that were caused by measures to fight the recent pandemic. Now, of course, this spend needs to be financed and recovered. And where should the money come from if you don't want to raise taxes to make sure you're not impacting economic recovery? And this is obvious that fighting the tax gap is a great approach for governments, making sure to get this money in. And the invoice plays a key role in that process, as the invoice is the prime audit source for tax collection. So there are two basic models when it comes to e-invoice compliance, although the slightly different ways of many countries approaching tax collections ends up in various and complex requirements in terms of invoicing on a global scale. The two basic models are the post-audit model, like what the US and Europe follows, at least for the moment, where the view to compliance is after the fact. And compliance means that companies are allowed to choose the way of e-invoicing based on a predefined framework, but they have different options like electronic invoices, PDF invoices, or paper invoices. There's typically no mandatory format in place. Clearance model as the opposite, mainly used in Latin America, where the requirements are more upfront and stringent. For example, they mandate specific e-invoice formats and ways how those invoices are sent from the supplier to the buyer. I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Within the European Union, Italy is the front runner, and they introduced a B2B clearance model already in the beginning of 2019, which means that since 2019, e-invoicing in Italy is based on one standard format, the so-called SDI XML, that became mandatory for every e-invoice transaction. And of course, a lot of other countries within the European Union were following up on that, seeing that Italy was able to increase the VAT tax revenue. And at the moment, we see that, for example, France and Poland are the next countries in line within the European Union, actively planning for e-invoicing mandates, setting the laws and rules into place. So what is the difference in more detail? The post-audit model, as said, is a model that is based on evidence. Checks are made after the fact. On the left side, this is the situation today in most European countries where the buyer starts ordering from the supplier. The supplier delivers then goods and services, and in parallel, the delivery of the invoice. The buyer pays, and at the end of the year or month, they both deliver the tax declaration to the government. The government verifies the tax declarations, they require some audit in some cases, they perform some random checks, and that's it. This is what we call the post-audit tax system. It is said, as said, it's based on trust, and apparently this is how you end up with a tax gap of 120 billion euro. Because checks are made after the fact, and sometimes a long time after the transaction was already done. So now on the right, this is what a lot of governments are looking at as an alternative. The commerce flow starts the same. The buyer orders, the supplier delivers. But then the supplier delivers the invoice to the government and not directly to the buyer. The government clears it, so this means they are making the checks immediately and not a while later during the audits. And then they make the invoice available to the buyer. Some of them make it available through a portal. Some of them are able to provide an API, different models in place in different countries. But now the government is involved in the flow. But of course, it would be too easy if some countries would not have come up with models that combine elements of both of those models, so-called hybrid models. So there is also some truth in between. In those hybrid models, for an example, some countries require the supplier to register the invoice with the government before they issue this invoice to the supplier. So once the invoice is registered, they get back some sort of certification or ID number that needs to be put on the invoice, and then they can send those invoices through the traditional channels or service providers, so either as PDF or paper. It varies between the different countries. So why are the countries doing it? And with the introduction, of course, it's pretty obvious. They want to bridge the VAT gap with that, because the clearance model allows more strict control on all the invoices that are flowing through the country, actually. So it helps the government to monitor the economic activity in the country in near real time. It helps to reduce the invoice processing cost because, of course, that is done electronically and not in paper. Think about the government that would have to check invoices on paper before they can be issued from the supplier to the buyer. They would be drowning in paper invoices, and it would heavily slow down the whole process. So electronic invoicing is absolutely required for that. It helps to reduce the processing costs on both ends for supplier, buyer, and the governments, and helps to reduce payment delays. And also, and that's a benefit for that, to automate part of the VAT reporting process. And you all know the saying, trust is good, control is better. And that's what a lot of governments think as well. The trend we can see now already started some years ago, mainly in the Latin American countries. We now see it coming to Europe as well, right? Italy started it, and it's causing attention. The increasing shift from post-audit models to more real-time mandatory controls is something that most of the research companies now expect to come in place and to be adopted by more and more countries in the future. As you see on the map, it's getting more and more yellow. It's now important to understand how to become ready for the shift. And that's part of our discussion within this webinar today. And I'm happy to have Lisa and Peter with me to discuss that.
Great, thank you very much, Georg. And that was fantastic. So we're going to go over now to Lisa. So Lisa, I'm going to start sharing your presentation for you. If you wouldn't mind a quick introduction, I'm going to pop back off camera again with Georg. We'll leave it to you, and then we'll all come back together in a few minutes for our discussion. Thanks very much, Lisa. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so good evening from my side as well. My name is Lisa Kurki, and I'm a solution owner in purchase to pay and order to cash at Kone. And the first slides I have here is to give a brief introduction of what is Kone and what we are today. So Kone is a global leader in elevator and escalator industry, and we are here to make cities better place to live. We are founded in Finland 1910. We are over 60,000 employees and 550,000 customers globally. And of course, this is kind of the global aspect here is very important when we talk about the vendor invoices and electronic vendor invoices. Then here the next slide is about our coverage in the global map. So we are present in 60 different countries, and you can imagine that it's a bit of a different topic of discussing e-invoices, for example, in Nordic countries, or then if we go to India or even US, the kind of understanding of what actually electronic and e-invoicing is different, and it has been a quite long and interesting journey to get where we are today. But let me come back to that a bit later. Then next slide is presenting a typical day at Kone. So we are in the service business and new equipment business, and this This means that we have different type of purchasing, we have different type of invoices. And of course, when we are aiming to have as automated flows and quick flows as possible, then the invoice quality and of course purchasing quality is very important. Then why e-invoicing? This slide actually was presented a few years ago by my colleague in similar type of webinar hosted by Busware. And actually, I didn't need to change much here. The kind of a final comment is the only one that I touch a bit. But why we wanted to start our e-invoicing journey was that we wanted to harmonize way of receiving the invoices. As you saw in the earlier slides, the global locations where we are present, it's quite wide, and there was plenty of deviations, and this was our first step and goal here. Then safety is very important in a sense that we have huge invoice volumes coming in, and we need to handle those effectively, and of course understanding that should this invoice even come to us, and what kind of steps we can take to make sure that we receive the correct invoices from the correct vendors. Improved quality. So when talking about the e-invoices, this is of course totally different story than if we are talking about the capturing the details from the invoice image, and that's the way how providing the metadata of the invoice. But in a sense, with e-invoices, the kind of a whole picture is a bit upside down in a sense that the e-invoice actually is now the invoice providing the details. So that was very important from our side. Then eco-efficiency and sustainability. This is also part of KONE values. So of course it was an easy match to our e-invoice project and implementation path, because this is of course a very eco-friendly way of delivering the invoices and receiving the invoices as well, of course. Fast delivery. This was one of the learnings that I will come a bit later on, that what it means that if there is a delays when receiving the invoices, and what is the kind of what was the impact and actions we took, for example, during the COVID times. Then the last part here, enabler for automation and touchless processing. So this was the one that I modified a bit, because during our very beginning of the journey, the touchless processing was actually just a pretty words. We didn't have that clear meaning for that, but today it's very obvious what we are aiming with that. And actually among our purchase to pay team, this is our future vision, and even the current vision in a sense that this touchless processing, it's a very important topic for us, and all the kind of a previous steps presented in these slides are coming together with this last part here. Then a short slide presenting what was our journey. So 2002 we started in Finland, and we opened up the interoperability channel for receiving invoices. Then we started to think that, okay, maybe it's time to take a step towards the other units and global approach. So we opened the channels in 2018, when actually our project work started. We opened up the interoperability, PDF, e-invoice, and key-in channels with Busware, with those units where it's legally allowed. So of course that's not the case in all KONE units during that time. Then last year we ended the project and stepped into this business as usual mode. with those countries where we had implemented the e-invoice channels. And what it meant was that we needed to establish a key user network in the units who are then monitoring what is happening in the units and what kind of new future changes are coming. What we are doing now is that we have continuously monitoring regarding the changes in countries, also identifying the new possibilities to move towards more electronic invoices. So for example, is back in 2018, we were not able to implement e-invoices to some of the KONE units. Now the situation has changed most of the units, and we are kind of going back and forth, checking what is the new approaches and where we can actually benefit the most implementing the e-invoices. And as said previously, Italy was also one of the cases on our side that was the first to implement the e-mandate, and actually that has been good learning as well, because the setup is a bit different in a sense what we are kind of, for example, implementing purely e-invoices. Then what is our target? I believe I mentioned that already, but anyway, to drive as high e-invoice ratio globally and approach this touchless processing. And I would say that our target, in a sense, it's a moving target, meaning that I would say that you are never ready in this area. There is constantly happening something. You could improve in some of the areas and take the new learnings. And this is kind of what we have realized during our journey. Then a quick slide regarding KONE e-invoicing trend 2019 and 21. And in this drawing, we have preferred channels in scope, e-invoices, PDF e-invoice, and key in portal. And as you can see, the blue line here is presenting the e-invoicing percentage, and it has been growing, and this is now global numbers. And from this drawing as well, I can just say that we are monitoring this topic very heavily, and we are also some of the targets that we are having for the future has also the relation regarding these figures. So it's a very important topic here at KONE. Then I believe this might be my last slide. It looks a bit poor regarding the content of the information, but the idea here was that I would try to more explain you what kind of experiences and learnings we have taken regarding the e-mandate and e-invoices. And would like to highlight here the compliant. This has been the kind of I would say most heard word in our project is to be compliant. And what it actually now means when we start talking about e-invoices, what is actually now the invoice after you start receiving e-invoices? It actually doesn't mean necessarily the paper invoice anymore. It's not even the PDF copy of the invoice, but it's actually the XML file which is containing the metadata, and it's actually the invoice that should be then treated as a compliant document. And this was a bit of a wouldn't say problem, but kind of an obstacle that we needed to overcome, was that we actually didn't have a global archiving solution in place. And then this compliant topic was raised, and we realized that, okay, if we want to move ahead with these e-invoices and be compliant with the KONE units, we need to start archiving also the XML files, not only the PDF copy of the invoice. And now that we have the archiving in place, in a sense, we don't have this type of compliant problem or obstacle anymore. But the other thing that we mean by compliant is that how should we receive the invoices, and how do we follow up what's happening in different countries, is that of course we are active inside Kone as well, and there are units around the world are monitoring what is happening in their areas. But then we also use audit companies and operator details to kind of spot where we are, and is there some changes coming, and what should be the actions that we need to take to be compliant. And from this topic, I will jump to this e-mandate. And actually, the e-mandate, in a sense, if it comes early enough and we have preparation time, I would say that from IT person's point of view, these are quite clear. We have a clear scope, we have clear schedule, we know what to implement. It doesn't matter if the e-mandate is coming to a small unit or big unit, it has to be done. It always follows the kind of a fast route, and kind of taking the first priority. Then, of course, when we know what actually the e-mandate means and what is the regulation, then we need to investigate on our side that is there an impact on the ERP side. For example, these kind of governmental response messages. Do we need to send back whenever we are handling the invoices, and then what is the kind of a triggering moment when we need to send it, and what is the compliance requirement in a sense. But then, of course, the e-mandate, it's I would say a bit odd animal in a sense that even though we are monitoring what is happening in the world, trying to be prepared, there are surprises. For example, there is a new joiner, Slovakia came just around the corner, and we should be already implementing it. And it was a kind of a big surprise from our side. But it's not the first time, and most probably not the last time, even though we are trying to prepare for that. But I would say that that's causing some of the challenges regarding how we are resourced, what kind of a team we need to have around these e-mandates. And one of the things that we have been discussing in our project team is that how to kind of prepare more advanced, and what kind of steps we can take so that we don't have to run immediately when we hear that, okay, there is a e-mandate coming. But yeah, I believe this is the area where you just need to be very, very aware of what's happening. Then jumping to the e-invoices, this how we approach the e-invoice implementation is, of course, that we are prioritizing the units that have the most potential to grow in this area. Then we are, of course, checking that how is the invoice handling process, for example, going. Is it a fit to implement e-invoices, or is there some manual steps that are still preventing us to move towards e-invoices? But then, of course, if everything is okay and we have capacity to do the implementation, then it's more or less testing the flow and seeing that everything is flowing in. One of the learnings that well, I don't know if we took it as a learning in a sense, but we have realized that the terminology when we start discussing about the e-invoices, that's a bit unclear. So for example, when we went to Australia and started to discuss that, hey, you have the Peppol network, let's start utilizing it. And then our Kone unit in Australia started to approach the vendors regarding the Peppol, but the kind of a common understanding what we actually meant by that wasn't there. So instead of going there with the kind of all the understanding that we have, we need to discuss first with the local unit and hopefully also someone from the operator side to understand what is actually now the terminology that we should use so that the vendors understand what we are kind of approaching and what we try to achieve here. Then, of course, better data and quick deliveries, that was mentioned already earlier, but this became very important when the COVID time started, and we still, of course, have scanned invoices, we have PDF invoices, but it was very problematic when the scanning offices were closed and there was no one who could access those locations, and then we started to have the problem that, okay, how do we get the vendor invoices and how we pay them if we don't receive those? So we needed to do quite quick actions to try to help our front lines in the world that what are the options and how do we tackle the problem. But I would say that this is kind of an ongoing topic in a sense that now I believe it's clear to our units that why electronic invoices are better options than the more manual ones. But in a sense, we are still doing the implementation and constantly monitoring where we are with the vendor invoices and what is the kind of a next step that we could take. Okay, that was last of my slides.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So, oh, I do beg your pardon, coughing there, cold from my grandchildren. So thank you very much, Lisa. Welcome back, Georg. And I can see that we're getting questions coming in on the chat channel. Please do keep them coming. We're going to get to as many of those as we possibly can. But before we do, I just want to take a few minutes to just probe a little bit more about some of the things that you both mentioned. So, Georg, let's go to you first. Now, clearly, governments are going to be looking at ways of closing the tax gap. Almost every government has got a significant shortfall they're looking to close. And so audit and compliance are going to go hand in hand here. But how best should we tackle compliance in an e-invoicing strategy? So how do we tackle compliance in our strategy?
Well, that's a very good question, Peter. And I think it's important to consider that compliance cannot be an afterthought, right? The governments will make sure that you will act according to the laws and regulations they set up. And if you don't act accordingly, they will put a fine on you. They will make sure you will act this way. So it's important for every company that is thinking about a global invoicing strategy, ideally an e-invoicing strategy, making sure to move away from paper and more manual processes to electronic means, to take that into account. So a traditional approach is to start with the home country, setting up all the processes, setting up all the definitions, and then roll it out to all the other countries that are in scope. It's a little bit flipped on its head these days, as you need to take into account the different models. What works in your home country might not work in any other country, right? So I'm based in Germany, and we do not have a clearance model now, but Italy has one. France is up to implement one. Starting from 2024, you need to be able to receive electronic invoices. And depending on your company size, in a phased approach from 2024 to 2026, you need to be able to send electronic invoices as well. So this is something that you need to take into account when you start your global e-invoicing strategy. Lisa also mentioned that archiving is part of it. So you need to look at it holistically from the requirements, take that into account, and you might need to start with countries where the requirements are already in place to meet the timelines, and not the countries that you just think like they are closer to your home country, they are your core markets. that is something that needs to be taken into account when you start the strategy.
Great, thank you very much, Georg. And Lisa, let me come to you with the same question. You mentioned compliance as well. How did you deal with compliance in your strategy at Kona?
Well, I have to say that it was a learning curve. We didn't start so professional, but nowadays we have a roadmap. We are constantly kind of checking that what items we have on the roadmap. If there is a change regarding the schedule when to implement it, we are taking it into consideration. And of course, we are doing other things as well than just this. So we are adjusting everything. For example, in purchase to pay area, what kind of projects and activities we do, we are kind of checking that if there is something appearing from this e-mandate angle, it has to take the priority. So it kind of it's obvious that you need to take the actions, and if you can have the roadmap and planning and identifying who is your gang that you need to implement it, then you are prepared.
Great, thank you very much, Lisa. Stay right there, because you did say that it was a learning experience for you and the team. And one of the things I think we all like to know were what were some of the best practices that came out of the project? And has it enabled you to really think about the approach you take for global compliance at a strategic level rather than just the tactical or the national level?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the learnings at least was that when we started the journey, there were different channel options available. And nowadays there are more advanced versions. So we, in a sense, implemented all. We just kind of took it everything. And now we are, in a sense, bit of a struggling. How do we change those vendors who are actually using some of the 2 years ago preferred ones, and how do we kind of transform them to more electronic ones? But as I said earlier, it's a kind of a constant work that we are doing, in a sense that I don't believe that we are now in a kind of a channels that will be there after 10 years, for example. There is constant changes. Then I would say that the other learning was that involve the local units more earlier phase, in a sense that instead of running the global project all the time, we established those business as usual mode to the units and this key user network. So there are kind of a key users in the units who are aware in more depths that what we are kind of talking about when we talk about e-mandates and e-invoices. And then it's easier from our global team as well to reach out and ask how it's going. Do you have any problems, any improvement idea? So kind of at the discussion to take it to the local level. So that was a very practical thing that we did, and it improved a lot how we are doing today.
Great, thank you very much, Lisa. So let me just see if I can play back to you a couple of things I heard. Then I'm going to ask George about this as well. So the first thing is, I think is an interesting point and very valid. Transformation isn't one and done. It isn't a sprint that you suddenly finish and you're done with your transformation, in that it is a process of evolution, not least of which because you're operating in a changing environment. So, you know, even if you manage to resolve everything for you perfectly, the rest of the world keeps changing the goalposts. The second thing I think is also equally important, that you do need the investment of the local units, particularly the people who are going to be using this system. And you have to have a balance between taking the strategic view and also tactical execution, and trying to bring in as much harmonization as you can where you can. But it's never going to be exactly one solution for everybody. But Georg, what else might we be thinking of? So apart from the, you know, making sure that you do keep an eye on the evolution of your process and involving some of the local stakeholders, anything else that should be on our minds?
Absolutely. So what should be on our minds is process readiness, right? With the clearance models and more stricter rules of control, e-invoicing is mandated in most of the cases. So you should ask yourself the question, Are your existing processes and tools already geared up for the requirements of e-invoicing? Are you really ready to receive and process those invoices? So I think we've seen during the pandemic that something can happen unexpectedly, right? It from one day to another, and typically that's not the time frame governments use to introduce new mandates, but sometimes it's a tight time frame we need to comply to. And the learnings from the pandemic were that companies that haven't established processes to use electronic invoices to process them were struggling with them. People were going to the office to scan paper invoices, to mail them to their colleagues, to actually approve the invoices, because the current processes have been set on paper. So signatures were used to be given on paper, the coding stamps were given on paper. But now when you need to move to electronic ways of working, you need to have tools in place that make sure that approval workflows are followed, that audit trails come with that, because auditors typically are not too happy with invoices that are approved just via email, where no one can really follow up on that. I think the process readiness is very important for them. Also taking into account that these mandates might change the way of some of your processes. Think about self-billing. It's a common process in most of the countries, but now a third party is involved in the invoice process. So it needs to be cleared with the government. Every invoice, depending on the local regulation, needs to go through the local financial authority. So even for self-billing. Another thing that might impact your processes is invoice rejections. Some companies decide to reject invoices if some sort of information is missing on the invoice that doesn't allow them to process the invoice appropriately. Maybe it's a planned number on the invoice, but that's just for internal processes in some cases. With the e-mandates, the government defines what is required on the invoice for tax collection. And once the invoice is cleared, you need to ask your supplier for a credit note and a new invoice if you want to change it or you want to reject it. So it's really having an impact on your processes with those mandates. And I think even if there are different countries setting up different processes and different requirements, you're better prepared for that if you're able to process electronic invoices, and which would mean that you just need to adapt to the local formats and smaller requirements rather than changing your whole process when an e-mandate is set in place in one of the countries you're operating in.
Great, thank you very much, Georg. We're going to just talk about one more thing briefly, and then we're going to open up the floor for some of the Q&A. And we've had some questions come in, so thanks for those, folks. Keep them coming. So, Lisa, back to you then. Having been through the journey, and we've just acknowledged it isn't ended, because it never will, as the requirements keep changing, but how best should you set up an organization to embark on the journey? So knowing what you know now, how would you start, and would it be different?
Maybe yes. I would probably start with the kind of a clearing that everybody knows what we are actually talking about. Because as I said, when I started explaining the slide, was that if we are talking about the e-invoices in Nordic countries, where we actually started the journey, it's totally different thing in Germany or even in India. So to understand where we are, and of course, when we understand the terminology and we know where we are with the current unit and what kind of actions we need to take, because most of the so to say tricky units, there was plenty of other things to do as well. So it's very difficult to implement the e-invoices if there are stamping and putting something in the paper before scanning. So it's not going to be kind of a straightforward. And then we need to kind of understand why we are doing this and what is the process. Do we actually need it anymore? And if yes, what kind of capabilities we have then on the electronic invoice side, because there are also some tricks that can be done if necessary. And for example, in our environment, there is a certain lesson learned requirement that we have this unique identifier coming in with each of the invoices, because of we had a few hiccups finding the invoices. So we decided that we want to have the unique identifier, and that has been added kind of a extra spice on our invoices. But with our volumes, it just makes sense that we have a bulletproof way of kind of identifying where the invoice is coming in. Then, of course, one thing that improved our providing the visibility globally was that we established reporting also on Kone's side. So we are able to follow where we are with the different channels. Are we with the preferred one, or do we have still a long journey to go? Of course, we are following as well the paid on time figures and this type of things, which comes much easier when you have a harmonized and global approach receiving the invoices, because then we know what is the trigger where we follow and what happened after that. So instead of having several different inputs to our ERP, we have only now this kind of a global approach. So that's an improvement.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And I think there's indeed a huge role in making sure everybody knows where we are right now, why we're going to make the change, and importantly, how they will benefit as well. Now, Georg, Basware deals with hundreds of organizations going through this. So let me ask you a similar question. Is there an optimal start point? And you're not allowed to say, yeah, don't start here. But yeah, where would you say what are the best techniques for setting up an organization to start on this journey of e-invoicing and dealing with the e-mandate?
Well, I think one of the best technique is making sure you have visibility into your processes. So, and on a global level, I think that is important, right? Some companies have well-documented processes, some others lack the documentation a little bit. If you have this visibility into your processes, it's much easier to start with, because you know what you're talking about, right? Visibility is key to that. Also knowing how are you acting in different countries? Where are you? Also think about the targets that you have with it, right? Do you want to automate? Do you just want to somehow comply to the regulations just to try to get away with it? This is a different start. I think visibility into your processes is key for every type of project in the IT. I think that is most important, because only then you can evaluate the impact any mandate or regulation will have on your organization. So I think that is always key, and I would start with that, drawing a process flow before you think about how would it impact you later on.
Yeah, thanks very much, Georg. And I think that is also important, isn't it? You really do need to understand how is the process work in theory and in practice, and use this, I suspect, as an opportunity to address perhaps some of those processes which do need a little bit of work. I've always looked at any programmer's transformation as being an opportunity to do a bit of a house cleaning whilst you're at it. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, get bogged down in really long, complicated process evolution, but it does mean let's deal with some of the issues got there. So thanks very much. Now we're going to go to the floor for Q&A, and we've had some coming through from the chat. So I'm going to try and take these in the order that they have appeared. We may not get through them all, and we may find that we won't have enough time to discuss them in full depth. But let's start with the first one then. So this is a question, Lisa, this will be for you. And if you can't answer this, please do say so. But the question is this: how many full-time equivalents, FTEs, are required or dedicated to running the solution in operations in Kone? And it says business and IT. I don't know whether you can do the split, but how many people are in the team?
In the project team, we were 6 to 7 people, depending on what was the kind of a phase of the project. But of course, then whenever we needed the kind of a testing people from the front lines, then of course there were local people joining the party as well. So I would say 10 at a time. For each country. Of course, then if we are already live in one of the countries and we are adding some new channels or something like that, then it's much straightforward. We don't need the whole group there. So then we can just kind of do the technical testing in a sense, and then just kind of point out to the unit that, okay, here is the test invoice, please go and check how it looks, and here you can see it from the report and so on, and then it's much more lighter approach. So I would say that nowadays we have all units already have some of the channels, so we are more like adding up at this moment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. Now, I don't know if this has been your experience, and Georg, you can probably comment on this as well. One of the things I've noticed over the last year or so is that a lot of the transformation programs absolutely require less labor to make them work. But rather than those jobs going away, they've been actually been rededicated to adding greater value. So increasing transformation, more onboarding, for example, more suppliers and so on. So Lisa, I'm just going to add that as a supplementary question. Is that what you found as well? You didn't make people redundant or get rid of the roles, they transformed into something else.
Yeah. And I would say that definitely like that. And of course, then when we realize that, okay, actually the data is very important. So what are we utilizing, and what kind of, for example, PO data we have. So then we have kind of a shift the focus elsewhere if we have more automatic way of receiving the invoices, but then we realize that, okay, now with the matching we have certain challenges. So we have been then kind of getting the knowledge and understanding where to put the kind of effort.
Yeah, I can just confirm that better data means better visibility into your business. And of course, better visibility into your business drives better business decisions. So that's definitely something that we see and that we all benefit from having electronic invoices.
Yeah, thanks very much, Georg. As I said, the experience I tend to see is that this is great for removing some of the things which are really just very labor intensive, but of themselves don't add a great deal of value, using a unique and valuable resource, which is the human brain, which if we can free up some time, they can do some of those things. Anyway, next question. I'm going to come to you, actually, Georg, for this first. Lisa, you mentioned that it's an eco-friendly way of sending and receiving invoices. And the question was, could you elaborate? But Georg, let me come to you for this, because I'm sure this is a point that Basware has had to address as well. And it's certainly coming up on the ESG agenda. What are some of the benefits ecologically of adopting a system like this?
Well, absolutely. Think about the paper invoices that you receive. You need to cut down some trees, you need to put in some water, some chemicals, a lot of input to make the paper that you can print the invoice on. So we've done some research, because of course we also got asked by our customers, hey, is there an impact? Does that contribute to our efforts to get more environmental friendly? And roughly 10% of trees cut down globally every year becomes paper for invoices. So think about the trees that we can save from moving to electronic invoices, and the energy used to produce these invoices, to transport them, right? The postal services, everything produces more carbon dioxide for paper invoices. Of course, there is a little bit of an impact for running the infrastructure for the electronic invoices as well, but it's a significant reduction. So we can save a lot of trees and water with using electronic invoices. And we have a report for our customers measuring this impact.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georg. And I'm sure that in the follow-up, we can let people aware of some of those reports. Lisa, I don't know if you want to comment on that, whether you've actually quantified any of those eco-friendly benefits we get there. As I said, the ESG agenda is, well, we've just had COP26. It is certainly an important point. More people are becoming aware of the environmental impact of some of these processes.
Yes, we are following these as well. As I said, the kind of eco-friendly is one of the Kone values, and it's more widely, but it was quite easy to adopt in this area as well, because it was quite obvious how to get the benefits out, and of course we are still working towards the kind of a more eco-friendly way of receiving and sending invoice.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Now, I can see we're not going to get to all of the questions, so I'm just going to see if I can squeeze in one or two more. So the next question is this. What is the governance in place within Cone to anticipate e-invoicing changes or new legislation in different countries? And I guess who's leading that? Is it led by finance or the legal department? Is it a partner giving you advice or audit companies? Who's helping you with that, keeping you abreast of all of those international, new and local changes going on in the e-invoicing, e-mandate environment?
Yeah. So at Kone, we have a compliance department who is, of course, monitoring as well this topic. But then we are monitoring that as well on the finance and IT side. So it kind of everybody is alerted who are involved. So if you get the information and you are kind of receiving some notification, we have a certain forum how we share it and make sure that the other streams are aware as well. So if I, for example, work with the vendor invoices, I'm double checking, of course, that we have the same information on the customer invoice side, and it even might be that even the e-mandate is touching only the other side. So if we have an e-mandate for customer invoices, we don't yet need to react with the vendor invoices. So the kind of a transparency regarding the information is very important. Then we use also audit firms in a sense. For example, if the e-mandate is coming and it's unclear what will be the impact, then most of the cases the local units are then contacting the audit firm, and they are kind of studying the topic together. But we have several different approaches, but I would say that the more information you get, the kind of a best prepared you are, and that's not an easy task. I have to say that that has been our struggle as well, and even though we are trying to be as prepared as possible, there are surprises and kind of a something that we didn't realize, or the schedule change or the scope change, and we need to kind of readjust.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm going to see if we can squeeze in just one more question for you. So if you wouldn't mind trying to be brief, but it's a big question. So when you work in Cone, what are you doing to try and increase the percentage of touchless e-invoices? Because clearly it's not 100%. So what do you do to try and increase the percentage of touchless e-invoices?
Good that you said that don't take too much time, because this is the topic that I could go on. But in a sense, as I said already earlier, the data, that's very important. But then I would also say that the ownership of the data, in a sense that we are a big company and we have different solutions also and processes. So who is, for example, owning the VAT details? Who is responsible that we have correct details and approvals, for example, on the purchase orders? And how do we, if we would have a cap in purchase order process, for example, that the approval is missing, how do we identify that when the vendor invoice comes in, that this invoice actually needs to be approved in a flow, instead of the case that we would have a purchase order already approved according to our guidance. So these type of topics are very in the centerpiece. But then I would say that these are probably quite obvious, most of the companies who are using purchase orders. But then I would say that the most interesting part is those non-PO invoices. So what kind of tricks and automation possibilities you have regarding those invoices, if those are the ones that you cannot onboard to the PO process at all? And I would say that in our case, we are checking how the kind of invoices were handled earlier. Can we utilize the data that we already now know? Then we are, of course, if we have total manual invoices, in a sense that there is no automation, then we try to keep up this kind of a guides how to how to handle the invoices, how you post it so that the end user, when they receive the invoice for review, it would be as ready as possible and as correct as possible.
Great. Now, Lisa, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there. So we've run out of time, and I did promise we would finish on time. Now, clearly, we've not been able to answer all of your questions or answer them in the depth that you would like. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to reach out to all of you after the webinar over the next couple of days and give you an opportunity to continue the conversation one-to-one. So we will answer all of those questions for you. We've made a note of that. But other than that, all I can really do at this point is firstly thank our experts. So Georg and Lisa, thank you so much. I've taken so many notes. You've given me a lot to think about. I want to thank Basware as well for the sponsorship. Without them, this wouldn't happen as a webinar. And to the Executive Leaders Network for organizing it. Great work, guys. But last, but by no means least, I want to thank all of you on our webinar today for your attention and for asking all of your questions. We will get back to them, I'm sure. But until then, thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye. Take care now. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.